I'll just hop right into it. So my name's Dale Sandberg. I'm with QSC, and we have a couple of years ago we decided we wanted to get a little bit more into what we call business music, but basically it's applications where audio's in the system, but it may not be the primary focus of the system. So this could be restaurants, it could be gyms, it could be high school cafetoriums. I mean, there's just common areas in retirement centers. There's just so many applications where audio is, again, in the system, but may not be the main focus of the system. And so we put together a set of products that works well together. Now, I'm going to be spending the majority of my time in the processor or zone mixer, but the other products that were developed at this time and are available through Volutone are the MPA amplifiers, fantastic little amplifiers, 2, 4, and 8 channels in a single rack space with up to 200 watts per channel. And then some new subwoofer and satellite combinations. It's really hard to demo speakers without actually demoing speakers, so we're not going to spend a lot of time there today. Like I said, we're going to spend most of the time on the processor, and so when we got into this segment, we recognized a need for an inexpensive but flexible processor, and so we created the NPM40 and the NPM80. If you're familiar with QSC and perhaps our touch mix mixers, these products were actually built on the DSP engine in the touch mix. The two processors, the only real difference between them is the number of inputs and outputs. So the NPM40 has 8 inputs, 8 total inputs, and 4 outputs. Now those 8 inputs, half of them are mic line inputs with phantom power available, and the other half are line level inputs. The NPM80, a total of 16 inputs and 8 outputs. And again, like the NPM40, half of the inputs are mic line inputs, the other half are line level inputs. Now with these outputs, they can be used for zoning, of course, like if you're doing a restaurant, here's the dining room, here's the bar, here's the patio, that kind of thing. But there is often a need for a single output for music on hold. Maybe they've got a phone system that when they put their customer on hold, somebody calls in to be put on the waiting list or whatever. They put them on hold for a second. They want to pipe music to the music on hold. There's an output dedicated for that. It's transformer balanced. It's designed to work directly with the phone systems, with the PBX. In addition, we've got these 2 general purpose inputs. These can be used for logic triggers, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. For all of your control, you're really going to be using, especially for setup, you're going to be using Ethernet, and of course we've got the Ethernet jack there. We've also got these 2 dedicated ports for our wall controllers. Now these are not Ethernet ports, these use RS-485. Each port can drive up to 4 wall controllers, or we call them MFCs, multifunction controllers. And these wall controllers provide volume and source select, scene recall, that kind of stuff, keeping it simple for the end customer. On the front panel, we actually borrowed a couple things from our touch mix mixers. So there's a headphone jack so that you can actually listen and do signal verification on your inputs and outputs and make sure the right signals are going to the right locations before you ever even connect it to an amplifier or loudspeakers. And then we've also got a USB port right directly on the front panel. So once the unit's racked up, I can walk up to it with a USB stick, plug in my program file, I can connect wirelessly to the device, and now I can start programming, recall scenes, that kind of a thing. The architecture is really important to understand, and so here we have basically an NPM40, and what you see is we've got the 4 outputs. Each of the outputs can select any of the inputs as a source. And so let's say output 1 is going to the dining room. I can select my background music source, or maybe I've got, maybe it's a sports bar, and I've got some different channels coming in from a dish receiver. I can select that. In addition to the source select capability, there's a mixer. And so I can also mix a number of channels. And I'll talk more about that application a little bit when we get into the software, but recognize that that mixer is available, and so that mixer can be used as a source as well. And so I can select my background music, and then I can select the mixer. Maybe I've got a little bit of live entertainment, or maybe some sort of function where I've got a couple of people with microphones, that kind of a thing. Of course, there's input and output processing as well to maximize the sonic performance of the microphones, or ensure that the loudspeakers are sounding as great as they can. We've already talked a little bit about control. Here's what the MFCs look like. Now, this is the square European style. In the US, of course, we'd use the Decora style panel, and available in black and white. But we also have this function called, or this application called MP Manage. This allows the end user to control the system from their phone or from a tablet, some sort of smart device. And MP Manage is a powerful interface. It allows, like I said, an end user, or maybe, think about, I've installed this system in a spin studio, and I have my spin instructors, and they come in and they want to connect and control the system from their phone. And so they can go in, and some of the things that they can do is zone control, which is primarily volume and source select. Or they can recall different scenes. I'm going to recall the scene for my spin class, and then later on there's a yoga class, and so they're going to do, recall a different scene. I have the ability to actually use the mixer and control that mixer from my phone or from a tablet. And then one of the things that a lot of people find very, very intriguing is our wireless store and forward. When I'm connected to the system, I'm connected via Wi-Fi, which means I can actually page via Wi-Fi from my phone. And so I would click the paging button. It would allow me to record a page into my phone. So table 7, your pizza's ready, or something, whatever. Once I'm happy with my page, I just hit send, and it sends to the zones that have already been programmed to receive that page. And so that that paging interface via Wi-Fi is a very, very cool sort of application. And the other thing that allows is people are used to using their phone. They know how to use that microphone, and so it means that you can do an install and not actually leave behind a microphone for paging. They can just use their phone as an interface. So some very, very cool elements within MP Manage. This is an application that's available on both iOS and Android operating systems. And like I said, it can be used on phones and tablets. So you could leave behind a little Android tablet on the wall kind of thing. And then they could control the system from that if you wanted to. So that is designed for end user control. This piece of software is designed for the actual installation. We call it MP install, and it's how you as the integrator would actually set this system up. And so in this particular case, this is designed to operate on tablets, but it can also operate from a PC. So I'm actually going to hop into the software, and I should be able to find it right here. Share. Okay. Can everybody see my my software screen there? Ross, can I get a thumbs up? Good. Okay. Looks like. Okay, good. Excellent. So what you see here, I'm connected, my computer, my laptop is directly connected to an MPM40. And this you can see the basic navigation along the right-hand side, inputs, outputs, mixer, the wizard, and other menu items. On the input side, I have, so here's my 4 mic line inputs. I've got nothing connected to those right now. However, in my particular system here, I'm actually going to push the play button on the CD player. And you should see some sort, there we go. So we've got a signal coming in on the CD player. I don't have it selected for this output, but I do have input coming into that. I have pulled the plug to my PC. I didn't want any sort of feedback going on, so I pulled that plug. But I also have under more, so I'm just going through these little tabs here. Under more, I do have a USB player. And so I click on that, and I can get in and see what what songs are there, and can select a different song if I want to. You also see under more, I see the network input where that Wi-Fi paging comes into, and so when a page is received, it comes through this channel and then goes out to whatever zones have been set up to receive that. So these are my inputs. Outputs, kind of the same sort of architecture. In this case, this is the NPM 40, so I've only got 4 outputs. And this is my home office, so I've got a stereo, I've got a pair of speakers here at my desk. And hey, I work for QSC, so I also put in a sub. And I've got this other output that I've called patio, but it's not really connected to anything. And I'll show you how we can change these up in just a second. Actually, before I move on to the mixer, these other blocks, these are other DSP elements, and I'll get into each one of these. You'll see each one of these. We have the same kind of thing, architecture on the input side, so we'll get into some of the other DSP elements that are available. This is my mixer, and you can see I've got input coming into that CD player, and if I switch over to the other tab, you'd also see input coming into the USB audio player. The one thing about the mixer is, let's say I want to use it for a live application. Maybe I've got like I said, a live band. The acoustic trio comes in and plays on the weekend, whatever. Or maybe I'm using it in a hotel ballroom kind of thing, and so they have a panel discussion. They want to want to have 3 or 4 people on the microphones. One of the nice things is this does have an auto mix algorithm, which is basically it allows you to share the gain between these panelists. So, and it's a pretty simple auto mixer. Basically, if one person talks, he gets all the gain. 2 people talk, they share the gain, that kind of a thing. But it is a useful tool, meaning that you don't have to ride the faders all the time. It uses the noise gates on those channels to mute the channels that aren't speaking. So, like I said, a useful feature. And in that ballroom, what they would do is they would just select the mixer as their source when that panel discussion is going on. And then after the panel discussion, they would go over to the wall panel or use the MP Manage application. And now they could select as their source the background music, which could be coming from the CD player or from some other source. So again, pretty simple navigation. There's a lot of power in this setup wizard, and this came about as we talked with integrators who basically said, I understand how to program a DSP. I know I need to do signal routing. I know I need to be able to adjust the EQ, adjust gain, those kinds of elements. My biggest problem is I'm not sure when I'm done programming. And so what we did is we gave them a checklist, gave you a checklist. You don't have to use it. You can go into the DSP elements, and I can go into this input, and I can change the name, and I can change the name in the setup, and we'll get into that. Or I could select my EQ and make some changes there. All of that can be done. But the setup wizard was just given as, look, here's a bunch of here's a kind of the setup process. Use it or don't use it, doesn't matter. And so if you already have a configuration, great, you can start with that. Load your configuration. It takes you to the configuration part of the menu, and you can see, oh, okay, so I've got some configurations already inside the memory, or maybe on a USB stick, I've got a configuration that I want to load, and I hit recall. Or perhaps I've saved some, maybe this Vans store, and so I can click on that, import it into the NPM, and now load that. So it just gives me a way to get configurations. And a configuration is the electronic design file. It's everything that's part of that system. It's all the processing. It includes scenes. It's everything. It's basically a huge snapshot of everything that's going on in that processor. When I'm done with that, I can go and check this box off. Now, I should mention that we've discovered a software bug that I've reported. Basically, all the other checkboxes work. For some reason, this checkbox actually will come back next time we go away. It'll come back and it won't be checked anymore. But so just be aware that's a software bug. and we'll get that fixed. Input configuration. Maybe I want to go into some inputs, and I'm going to turn input 1 into a paging microphone. So paging mic. You can see the name is now in the channel strip right here. And this is my setup, the little cogs. If I go to inputs, it's the same thing. Oops, it's the same thing as if I went to setup right here. And now I can see different elements that are available there. Here's my input trim, so I can make changes to that. I can turn on phantom power for that microphone if it needs it. Polarity invert, stereo linking, so I can link two channels together and create a stereo pair. There's also an input delay. Now, generally, you don't want to delay audio on an input, with the exception of sometimes when you're going through a video matrix, it will delay the video. And so you kind of get that samurai movie effect where you see the lips move after you hear the talking start. And so what you can do is you can delay your audio until it matches the video. Now, most video comes across at 30 frames a second, and so that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 milliseconds is if it's dropped a frame or if it's slowed it down by a frame or two, right? Two is it's going to be right around 66 milliseconds. So somewhere in that range. And so it just gives you the ability to delay your audio to match the video. Once I'm happy with the input 1, I can click next up here. Now I'm at input 2. And now I can do the same thing, right? Set that up however I need to. And go through all the other inputs, and you can bounce through those. Check that box off. Yes, I'm happy with all my input configuration. Now I'm going to hop into output configuration, and it's the same kind of thing. Here it's the setup cog, and you can see the other output elements right there. I can name it. So right now I've set this up for my home office, but this I could name it something else. I'm actually going to demonstrate something, so I'm going to use my wall controller that's sitting on my desk, and I'm selecting the USB player. This is my master volume for the zone. Now, I can go in and name, I can invert polarity, link channels, this is stereo linked right now. I could unlink those if I wanted to. Channel safe is if I recall a scene. If I make a channel safe, that means it won't be changed by that scene recall. So that's what channel safe is. I've got output delay as well. But one of the other unique things about the MPM is it does have this ability to adjust the minimum and maximum output of that zone. As I adjust my fader, you can see the numbers here change. So if it's all the way down here, it's at 0. If it goes all the way up, it goes up to 100%. I'm not going to turn it all the way up right now. But I can adjust those levels. So what I normally do is I'd start here on the low end. That's as soft as I want this to be. And maybe at -40 or whatever. And now I can go and adjust my maximum. And that's as loud as I want it to go, or whatever, right? So I can adjust those levels. And that can be done per zone.
Just to interrupt you real quick, since we've got a question that pertains to kind of exactly what you were just doing there.
Okay, super.
You mentioned -40 dB as we're moving the slider there. It's hard to land right on that number. Can we type in a number to set a value exactly?
Not yet. However, we do have nudge values. We have the ability to nudge and use our fine control. And so since I've clicked on this fader, it's going to allow me to nudge that. And right now that's in 1 dB increments, nudge that up and down. But if I hit fine and nudge that up, now I'm at 46 dB exactly. And at this point, I can nudge that exactly to -40 dB. So it just gives me, I can grab it and freewheel, or I can nudge, use these nudge controls. If I click on 0, it returns to its original position. So just some quick keys there. And actually, if I hit next, it actually takes me to the next control there, and I can adjust that. So previous to next. So these all are useful when editing, and then copy and paste. If I'm happy with this particular output, maybe I've set that and I'm happy with those functions, I can hit copy, and I'll go to the patio and hit paste, and it ends up copying those elements. So good question on the typing. Typing is not available yet. That's a feature that a lot of people have asked for, and it's something that we will be adding in the future. And so you've seen how I can adjust outputs. Great. I'll go back to my setup wizard, click that box, and you can see I can just go through all these different steps. Source selection. So here, let me go to the office, which is the my main office setting, and you see a list of 4 different sources that are selectable, and the rest say none. If they say none, it means they don't show up in the wall controller. It doesn't show up in the MP Manage application. So I can take this Bluetooth and I can actually eliminate that. If I click on none, that Bluetooth is no longer available on my wall controller. Unfortunately, you can't see my wall controller at my desk, but right now it says USB player and PC left and right and CD player. The Bluetooth isn't available anymore. And so it just gives me, again, the ability to pick and choose what the end customer has as a selectable source. So those are selectable sources. In addition, we've got priority sources. And so a priority source could be like a jukebox, or it could be like a paging interface or paging microphone or something. And so let's pretend the input 3 is a jukebox. So when that jukebox plays, I can set the level for it to, how loud that's going to play. I've also got what we call ducker controls. And so I can choose to, once the jukebox plays, I can choose at what threshold it will duck or lower the gain for whatever happens to be playing here, whether it's a CD player or the USB player, whatever. And so here I can set that, hey, you know what, at minus 45 dB or whatever, nudge that down, minus 45 dB, that's going to duck whatever music happens to be playing from my CD player or whatever. How far down is it going to duck? Oh, it's going to duck it by 30 dB or 60 dB or maybe just 3 or 6 dB. Now, this ducking depth is really useful. If I want it to basically mute the audio, I just pull it down by 60 dB. That's going to be, that effectively kills it, very much so. But there are times, and I'll go back to the Spin Studio scenario. There are times when I want to use this, and maybe that's going to be my spin instructor's microphone. And now I can just duck that music by 6 dB. So whatever's playing is going to be dropped by 6 dB. So that spin instructor can instruct the class. Okay, let's be honest, a spin instructor yells at the class. And so as she's yelling at the class, come on, you can do it, you've got 1 more mile, or whatever it is, it ducks the music by 6 dB. When she's done yelling at them, the music comes back up by 6 dB. So that's a pretty useful feature as well. And then how long the ducking remains? It remains as long as the spin instructor is over the threshold plus this hold period. So this hold period can be as long as basically 2 seconds or as short as 10 milliseconds. And so it gives you the ability to adjust that, and this hold period happens, and then there's the ramp up period. So that's kind of what happens in my selectable sources, and I can just click next, 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 and go to the other zones and see what's available there. Now I clicked over to the sub so that you would see something interesting. This is a subwoofer that is connected to my zone, and in this case I don't have a source selected, I've actually got another zone selected. We call this zone follows zone. So whatever music, whatever content is going through my office also gets sent to the subwoofer zone. And then I can have an independent level on that. And so this allows me to make adjustments in my office. Volume goes up, great, it goes up to the sub. Volume goes down, or a different source is selected, great, that source is now selected for the sub. And now that, whatever's going through here is also going through this, oops, the subwoofer. And of course, it's at a much lower level because it's already band limited. But that's a way to we call it zone follow zone, and it's a way to have zones that are following the same content but have different processing. So that's kind of how I do that. Go back to my setup wizard, check that box off, and I would move on. Speakers, great. I can select speakers. Of course, we've got the complete list of QSC loudspeakers, and I can pick and choose whatever I want here. But maybe you don't have QSC speakers. You can create your own speaker tuning, as I've done actually for this particular subwoofer. So, and then once I've done that, I can save that as a user preset if I wanted to. Going back to my setup wizard, check that box off, and I can continue going through the setup process. What I wanted to kind of illustrate here now is I'm going to share one other document. And this is, let's see, where are you? Come on. I've got a lot of things open, unfortunately. There we go. Okay, so this right here. So this is, let's say we've got a little bar, restaurant kind of thing with a patio. And I've got some speakers in my main restaurant or bar, and then a couple speakers out here on the patio. I've got wall controllers in each of those zones. Okay, great. I'm going to go and set that system up. So now I need to go back and share the software and share. Yeah, turn this down. Actually, turn it off. Okay, so I would basically go through this process, and I could go, maybe I've already got a configuration, I've got that stored, but maybe not. So let me just go and I've got my music input. So let me just create a music input here on input 2. This is, I'm going to call it just BGM and hit enter. And I can make an adjustment. If I've got a source coming in, I would make an adjustment, and now you'd see that input level showing up here. This doesn't require phantom power. It doesn't require any delay, so I'm happy with that. Great. That's let's just say that's my only input. Now I do have some other DSP elements, so maybe I want to EQ that. If it's a content source, I probably don't. But if it's a microphone, I might want to high pass it, right? Turn that on, high pass it, whatever. But in this case, I'm not going to. I'm actually going to reset that. Okay, great. So I've got my business or my background music coming in. Super. Now I've got 2 zones, and I'm just going to go directly to my zones. I'm going to set these up, and I'm actually going to reset everything in this. So zone 1, this is going to be my great. And it's a restaurant, and I don't have any other content coming in, so maybe I don't need to delay that. But I have, and once I start playing music, I may want to set my maximum and minimum levels. But let's go on to the other zone. So I just click next, and now this zone is going to be this is the patio. And it probably will have a different maximum and minimum. Now, the next thing I'm going to want to do for each of these zones is I'm going to want to go to my sources. And so for my restaurant, I'm going to reset this. Yes, reset everything. Yes, thank you. So it starts out like this. Nothing's selected. Well, here I want my background music source available. And maybe that's my only content. I would turn that on. And now here's my fader, and it goes 0 to 100%. Now nothing's coming in on that content channel. So maybe I will add my CD player because I know that something is coming in on the CD player as well. So if I select that, so I've got output going to that particular zone, and that zone is the restaurant zone. Now maybe I want the exact same elements to show up on the patio. Maybe I need to adjust level, independent level for each of these inputs, whatever. Another thing I might want to do is set up Wi-Fi paging. So here I've got my different sources and I can just scroll down. There's my Wi-Fi paging. And I want that page to come in at this level. And I can, make some adjustments here, whatever. Great, I'm all happy with that. I'm going to copy this whole zone, go to the patio, and hit paste. So now it's copied all of those pieces, Wi-Fi paging, the CD player, the zone that was selected, everything is copied. And now I've got independent level, of course, for that zone. Go back to this zone. And so I've got both of my zones set up. That's super. Now the other thing, if I would go back to my drawing, is I've got loudspeakers in each of those. Well, the speaker presets are found here. So let me go to my restaurant. I'm in my restaurant zone. Speakers, great. And in this case, maybe I've got the 80 series, but I've got pendants. So this is the ADP, and I've got a subwoofer, ADP sub, and I've got some satellites. So ADP sub with the 4 pendant satellites. I hit recall on that, and it just loaded a speaker tuning for that particular zone. So it's that speaker tuning's been loaded, and everything's good. I go to my restaurant. I go to my patio zone, and I can do the same thing. In this case, I've got some ADS 4s or 6s on the outside on the patio. I hit recall, yes, and now it's set that up. And so I've got my 2 zones, and they've been set up with their speaker tunings, and so everything's looking good for those particular zones. The last thing that I would want to set up would be wall controllers. Now I can find wall controllers in my setup wizard. I would just click on wall controllers. But a lot of these elements, the wall controller setup, smartphone setup, all of that's found in the menu. So I'm just going to shortcut and go straight to the menu. Go to my controllers, and here's where I'd set up those wall controllers. So the first one's going to be in my restaurant. Okay, and it's just going to control that zone. Or I actually could put this maybe in the office and control multi-zone. So now it's controlling the restaurant and the patio. But in this case, I'm going to go single zone. The one other mode I do have is scenes only, so it can only recall scenes. So those are the kind of the 3 modes of my wall controllers: single zone, multi-zone, and scenes only. So that's the restaurant. Now when I'm ready, so I've set this wall controller up. Now all I need to do to pair it is click on the pair button, and now press and what you see, or what I see, unfortunately you can't see this, but what I see on my wall controller is it just lit up with a message that says press a button to pair this device, and it gives me a little address, 48874 FAD. So I push any button on the wall controller, and now it's paired with 48874 FAD. So that's been paired. I would go to the next one. I'm going to call this one patio. I hit enter, and I'm going to make this a single zone, and it's going to select that patio. Maybe I can add scenes or not, whatever. I hit the pair button, and it's going to do the same thing. So I don't have a second wall controller set up here at my office. Otherwise, I'd do that right now.
Hey Dale, can we address a couple of questions?
Yes,
One
please.
specifically on the wall control. Cool.
Yes.
Are wall controllers lockable, or do they need to be out of public access?
Great question. Yeah, security by obscurity. They are not lockable. We've talked about adding that, adding maybe a little 3-button pin or something like that. Because our wall controllers only have an increment or an up and a decrement down, and then a selector button in the center, it's pretty hard to make them lockable. We could do it, and we've talked about ways to do it, but we haven't made that available yet. And so my recommendation is put them out of customer reach. right? So if it's in a restaurant, yes, behind the bar is probably okay, but not just anywhere on a wall. Um,
Awesome.
yeah.
And then one quick follow-up regarding the loudspeaker voicings.
Yes.
The preloaded speaker voicings, what about environmental adjustments? Do we start from scratch or adjust based on the preset? So I think we're in two different
Great question.
stages there. Yeah.
Yeah, so the great question. The first one is, so the speaker tuning is exactly that. It's designed to maximize the performance of that loudspeaker. The next thing that I would want to do is I would want to go and EQ it in the venue. So now I've got a graphic EQ on the output. I can engage that, and that EQ is available, and I can make adjustments there. I've actually got a couple of other tools that I'm going to show you. Um, in my menu, I've actually got a system test function. And now, and I'm going to do this at low level because nobody likes pink noise a lot. But I can generate pink noise and then send it to that zone. So and so now I can be listening to that pink noise in that zone. I'm going to go back to my output, go back to the graphic EQ, and there's my pink noise in my zone. And as I make changes to this, right, I can hear changes going on, and you can see the changes going on in the RTA. Now this RTA is just, here, let me just turn this down. This RTA is just an electronic RTA, so it's looking at, in this case, the output of that particular zone, and at the right at the D to A converter.
Right. And so, just as a best practice, right, the loudspeaker voicing is really to make sure that the mixer is providing the best signal for that particular type of loudspeaker, be it a
Exactly.
subwoofer or a ceiling speaker or a satellite pendant. The preset for the loudspeaker does not take into account what your room sounds like. And so
Architectural issues. Yeah,
yeah, there's always a need for EQ for the room after you've done the preset for the loudspeaker.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Um, so yeah, in fact, so as I was working through this system, um, I would go and EQ both of these outputs and make sure that they sound as good as they can. Now I also have, if I'm going through the setup wizard, I would do speakers, I would do any sort of additional output EQ, right? That's where I would go. And but there's a couple other tools that I should probably tell you about. We do have a feedback suppression algorithm. Now, generally, this is only useful for live applications. I wouldn't put it in any sort of pre-programmed content application. There's no reason for it. But there is another really powerful tool called the loudness function. And this, let me turn off my pink noise before I do anything beyond that. So I'm going to go back to my outputs. The loudness function. What I can do is I can use this loudness function to ensure that my speakers sound as good as they possibly can after I've EQ'd them. Now these curves that you see behind are called equal loudness contours, or some people call them the Fletcher-Munson curves. In the 30s, they did a study and basically found out that our ears are not flat. At loud signal levels, our ears are kind of flattish, but they still require more low frequency. There's actually kind of a dip corresponding with our ears are most sensitive in this 2 to 5K region. And then we need a little bit more volume at the highest frequencies. So these correspond to how our ears hear sound. But the interesting thing is, at low levels, when the volume's turned down, I need a lot more low frequency in particular. And so what we did was we pre-programmed that EQ into the loudness function. And the way it works is I would generally set my fader kind of in the middle of its range, somewhere in the 50s. I would turn this loudness function on, and then I would set the threshold for loudness just below my fader level. When the volume gets turned up, great. Our ears respond even better when the volume's loud, we hear more low frequency, and everything sounds great. When the volume gets turned down, and once I cross that threshold, my ears want to hear more low frequency. And so what this does is there's a what we call a dynamic EQ. It's basically an EQ curve that as I turn the volume down, it pushes the low frequencies up. And it follows these Fletcher-Munson loudness curves. And so basically, when I'm right at that threshold level, it's not boosting. When I cross, it's boosting only just a little bit, not even probably a dB or maybe a dB or so. But the more I turn the volume down, the more it boosts these lowest frequencies, ensuring that your system sounds musical and full range, even though the volume's been turned down. Because usually what happens when the volume gets turned down, the system starts sounding tinny or thin, and that's because our ears want to hear more low frequency, and they just don't respond at lower volumes. So this is just a useful tool for ensuring that the system sounds as musical as possible, even at low levels. So that's another tool that you can use. And then there's a limiter that you can put on the output to make sure that you're not going to blow your speakers up and that kind of a thing. So these are the tools that I would use. Now we have pretty much seen, well, actually, I'll take you through some of the other details. So before I do that, let's see, we're at 10:40, or my time 10:46, your time 9:46. Are there any other questions that we need to dig into real quick?
We have one general question. Are there any plans to support a native streaming service, either AirPlay or casting directly to an NPM?
Right, good question, good question. And it's not the first time I've heard this question. If you remember, when I go to my inputs and click on more, I've got my USB player, but I've also got this network input that we're currently using for Wi-Fi paging. Conceivably, we could turn this into maybe I could connect to some sort of network URL stream, and so connect to something that's coming internet radio or something like that. So we've talked about that, or perhaps this could be a Dante channel from QSys or from some other device. We've talked about that possibility. We don't have that programmed yet, but it is something we are looking into. We've had streaming services ask us about that, and so it's something we're investigating. It would require the right type of network switch. It would require all of that kind of stuff, but it is something that is intriguing, and we definitely are looking into it.
Awesome.
Good.
And so that takes care of one other question we got, which is this Dante capable? Is it AES-67 capable? Will a Tech parts be compatible? And so my answer to that in the chat comment was not at this time. There's no
Right.
network audio capability with
Yet.
NPM. We may at some point have a small workaround for a single channel, but we should not consider that a solution today.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, it could be a single channel, it could be two channels. We don't, the little microprocessor that's being used in the NPM, it may or may not be able to handle more than that. Certainly it can handle a single channel because we're using it for Wi-Fi paging. So it's an ongoing investigation. Great question. Thank you.
And just to dovetail from there, we do QSC does have a whole platform of products called QSys with core processors that if you are interested in network audio, be it Dante AES-67, used with the Tech panels, we've got a whole other ecosystem for all things network audio, and we can get into that more on a different webinar.
Exactly.
We had one other question, which I may follow up on with some best practices in our follow-up email, but just a question on kind of what do you do on how to configure a limiter for an output channel? Dale, do you have
an outline for that? Basically what I do is it's very loudspeaker dependent. And so I actually begin looking at the spec sheet for the loudspeaker. And usually they will tell you what the maximum power is. Sometimes they will tell you what the maximum voltage is. And so there's some calculation involved. But what you need to do is you need to know what the maximum voltage is for that loudspeaker, and then figure out what the voltage gain of the amplifier is, and then recognize that you're working with. So we're going from dB full scale through a D to A converter to an amplifier, and so it's very much dependent on the gain of the amplifier. It's a little bit beyond the scope of the discussion, but once the calculation is not difficult. I mean, it can be done easily in an Excel spreadsheet, that kind of a thing. But once you know what that is, then you can adjust your output threshold to ensure that you're not going to put those loudspeakers in damage.
Awesome.
So yeah, great question. But it does require some calculation, and it's very dependent on the amplifier, right? If you've got a 200 watt amplifier, if you've got a 2000 watt amplifier, it's two different things. So just kind of finishing up here, and I wanted to make sure that we got through some of the other DSP elements. We've already seen the parametric EQ. There is an input dynamics function. So if I'm working with a microphone, I would probably use a compressor. If I'm using a content source, I'd probably use automatic gain control. And here I can adjust the window that I want the content source to live in, and then how much gain I'm willing to apply to that to get that to go there. I've also got a noise gate. So that noise gate would typically be applied more to a microphone, just noisy sources. On the output side, we've already seen our elements. We've seen the, well, I'll just take you through them. We've seen the setup. We've seen sources. We've seen our presets. We've seen graphic EQ, feedback suppression, a loudness function, and the limiter. Now, one thing that both the input and output have is an overview function. It basically shows all the DSP elements in that channel. And so this is pretty useful just for giving me kind of a bird's eye view of everything that's going on. But it also means if I like something that's happening in a channel, I can actually copy and paste all of those elements into the next channel. So or I could just go to the graphic EQ, right? I want to copy this EQ to the next channel. Great, I hit copy and I hit paste, and it just does the EQ. So the overview copies and pastes everything. The individual elements, they just copy and paste whatever you see. I should probably spend just a little bit more time in menu. So in the setup wizard, they are links to places either in the inputs or outputs or places in the menu. And so setting up wall controllers, that just takes me, so if I click on that, it just takes me to this wall controller setup. Other things that I have here are I can set up my smartphone. In this case, instead of 8 wall controllers, I've got 8 different user access profiles or security access settings or whatever user profiles, whatever you want to call them. But here, let's say I've got a spin instructor. Right? And so I want to choose which zones that spin instructor will have access to. If I don't select it, they won't have access to it from their phone. And I can select other functions. So do I want that spin instructor to be able to do paging? Do I want them to be able to recall scenes or schedule scenes? Do I want them to be able to lock zones, save scenes, control the mixer, use the USB audio player? Or do I want to give them access to security? Now, security is interesting, and we're kind of running out of time. But once I'm happy with all these elements, I just great. I'll hit save, and that spin instructor profile is saved. In regards to security, the manager, that's the only thing that the manager always has. That's all to allow. So Spin Studio, this manager, and I can give them, control over various zones, whatever. Yes, they have access to paging and, maybe recalling scenes. But the security, having them have access to security means that when Susie That's horribly sexist, I'm sorry. But when Susie, my new spin instructor, joins the staff, I tell her, okay, download the free app, MP Manage, from the App Store. And once you have that, you can connect to the system Wi-Fi. Once she's connected, on the manager's phone, it pops up and says, there's a new user, Susie. And so he looks in his security, and I wish I could show it to you, but I can't on my phone. It's on my phone, and I can't show that to the webinar. But that access level, it, within the manager's security menu, Susie's phone shows up on a list of all the other users, and then he can assign her to spin instructor level. And once he's assigned her, she has access to these zones and these other elements. Now, 3 months down the road, she decides she's going to move to Arizona or whatever. Great. He can go in and remove her phone from the system. She no longer has access to to those controls. So that's how security works, and it's something that is, kind of warrants a little separate discussion, but that's how that works. But each of these, you could set up different levels for lots of different people. You could have multiple people with the same access level. So you could have, 5 different spin instructors, and they all have the same access level. And so it's a way of dealing with lots of users. You can have up to 12 users controlling the system simultaneously, and you can have more than 50 people in your list of users. So it's just a way of managing, how many people have access through their phone. Other things that are in that menu, scenes. We didn't really talk about scenes, but I can save and recall scenes, and these are basically just quick snapshots. The nice thing is these can be of specific channels. So maybe you only want certain channels to be recalled as part of that scene. Great. And I can save that either internally or on my USB stick. And so I would just click on save, and it just saves those particular settings. And so when I recall working or whatever, spin class, whatever it is, emergency, whatever that is, then those zones and inputs are recalled. So that's scenes. So configurations, that's our electronic design file. We've already seen that one. Scheduling. So I can schedule different scenes. I can have these things automatically scheduled. So here, this could be, and I'm just going to call it happy hour. And so when does that start? Oh, that's going to start at 5 p.m. How often, what scene is it recalling? Well, if I would have created a happy hour scene. And so, yeah, it's going to recall that scene. And how often does that repeat? Oh, that's just on weekdays. That kind of a thing, and gets a bunch of different events going. Now this green indicates that these are active. So I could have some scenes that are seasonal. Maybe this is the that's not how you spell Christmas. This is the Christmas show, whatever it is, right? And so, when does that show start? And I can, that starts at 5 p.m. as well. And maybe that is daily. But I can then go in during the off season and turn that schedule or that particular event off. So I just click on that event, turn it on, turn it off, that kind of a thing.
Hey Dale, we're right up against it here.
Yeah.
And obviously for anybody with us, we didn't get too much into amplifiers or loudspeakers or system design on, what is the right, list of products per application. We certainly are happy to help with all of those things. So just to reiterate, my name is Ross. I'm with Audio Gear. Our firm supports Volutone and QSC in Southern California, basically everywhere from Kern County and San Luis Obispo down to the border, also Las Vegas. So for any of those details, very project specific, or if you'd like some more individual training with your team, I can assist there. You can get me through Gary and the local guys at your branch of Volutone. And Dale is our resource for all things the business music platform, and if you get interested in the QSIS for hospitality deployments. So we are happy to help either virtually in this manner and hopefully soon back in the field. Audio Gear owns demo equipment. If somebody needs to interact with the mixer and a wall controller or hear some of the different loudspeaker configurations, we can make that happen hopefully soon. We're also working with Voluatone to get some sort of a working display of this system up in the branches, and that project is understandably on hold at the moment, but this is definitely an important platform for QSC, and it will be around for a long time, and it will be in development for a long time. So thank you for the questions. I'm glad we were able to touch on a number of topics that hopefully help you today, and we were able to allude to some things that the system might be doing down the road. Want to thank everybody for the time.